It's great to see all of you enjoying each other's company. And hopefully you will likewise enjoy studying with us today, because we have two important topics for our study session. We are going to start with the public safety budget. And Mr. Clark, would you like to introduce that topic?
Yes, this item will be presented by Chris Escobedo, the Assistant City Manager. Chris, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful, thank you. Mayor and Council, thank you so much. I'll take first part of this presentation, and Lieutenant Wilson will be joining me shortly as well to talk about calls for service. Next slide, please, Anthony. So in the next fiscal year, the major initiatives we have set and proposed are threefold. Number one, the deployment of phase 2 of the ALPR system. Recently, the City Council approved the award of phase 2, which means we have the installation of the system set to be installed in all intersections throughout the city of Palm Desert. We know that it serves as a key investigative tool, force multiplier, and it's increasing the solve rates for crimes. Additionally, in the last couple of months, we've had discussions with the school district and Palm Desert Charter Middle School about restoring the school resource officer that was what was once at Palm Desert Charter Middle School. So the district and the middle school are both prepared to enter a 50-50 cost share with the city, should the council be open to it. Essentially what we know is that from the recent events at the middle school, this officer will have a enhanced presence both for issues that happen, but also providing the guidance and counseling support that we know the SROs to be good at. The good part about an SRO, it's the least expensive sworn position that is offered by the Sheriff's Department. At the same time, by adding an SRO, we know that it also relieves patrol deputies of the calls for service and time needed to respond to incidents at a school. Over the last several months, we've also heard from the Public Safety Committee, Council, and residents about the need for additional traffic enforcement. In the next coming months, we will be seeing additional DUI checkpoints, deployment of sheriff staff with the CVMET team, and then also greater coordination with the street racing team. On the other side of the initiatives, we have several cost containment measures that we've been looking at. And I guess I would step back and say the city manager, Lieutenant Wilson, and I have been looking closely at metrics, service levels, and how do you enhance levels at a minimal cost. So that's kind of the premise of this presentation. We know a key component is using technology to keep staffing levels flat. A couple of years ago, the City Council increased the community service officers. And so this year we looked at how to best utilize each officer to offset some of the service impacts that we're seeing. So we'll go into that shortly. And then also we've identified several cost recovery charges that have not been updated since 2015 or 2016, including impound rates, as well as DUI related impound rates. So those are also items I'll be looking at this next fiscal year. Next slide. I'll go into this detail shortly, but essentially for the next fiscal year, we have a grand total of 21.4 million set for the expenditure for police services. The major cost factors are the Sheriff's Department is proposing a contract rate increase of 2.5%. So that's factored into these numbers. Additionally, we have into this budget here the costs for ALPR phase 2 and the addition of a school resource officer. Next slide. We're happy to share this detail if it's hard to see via screen right now. But essentially, the number we showed previously, which is the 21.4, these are all the line items that make up these numbers. The biggest cost factors are those patrol deputies, which is item 1 at $11 million. So it's 28 patrol deputies that are on the street on a 24/7 cycle, preventing and responding to calls for service. Additionally, line items 2 through 13 show the various dedicated resources that we have in Palm Desert, whether it be the lieutenant, SROs, motor officers, and participation in the regional gang task force and other task force. Line items 14 through 27 show all the other supporting costs that go into the contract rate, including overtime, use of the Palm Desert Station, vehicle maintenance, etc. Next slide. So here we just have a brief illustration of the last few years of the contract rate adjustment. Right now, we're averaging from the last 5 years an approximate average rate of 4%. We know in previous years, we saw contract rate increases be at 10%, 7%. And so what we see now is a leveling off and tapering down of that rate. This year, we're set to end the year at 1.89. We projected the current year to end at 2.5. So this year, we're going to experience some savings in the law enforcement rate. And next year, the Sheriff's Department has given us a range of 2 to 2.5%. We're projecting on the higher side to be more conservative as we into the next fiscal year. Next slide. So here's essentially just the summation of the various resources that the city gets by contracting with the Sheriff's Department and at this high service level. On the first column here, we have the patrol deputies, the business district team, various resources that are dedicated to Palm Desert. We also have the leadership and overhead, including the captain, lieutenant, sergeants that essentially direct the field operations. Also in here, it's important to note that there are certain services that we directly pay for, but there's also services and resources that we get by nature of the formula of the contract rate. So you have admin staff, payroll, investigative officers that also support the various operations that happen with the contract. Next slide. Earlier, we mentioned just the reallocation of CSOs. Essentially, we're looking at the total number of 11. Lieutenant Willison, the city manager, and I looked at, you have 11, and the key part for this is, how do you best utilize these bodies? What are some of the gaps? What are the efficiencies to be found? And essentially, we will still be committing to having 6 on patrol, 1 on crime prevention, 1 on admin support. There was a sworn sergeant that was the admin support officer. So versus pay the $350,000 per year for that position, we're now using a CSO to handle the admin tasks, which is half the price. Also, we have 2 officers set for dedicated daytime traffic enforcement. And due to the incidents that have happened of recent at nighttime, we're proposing to move one of the officers, the CSO, to nighttime enforcement to respond to issues that happened in the after hours. So with that, I'm going to pause if there's any questions. Anthony, I'm also going to defer to you to see if Lieutenant Willison has signed on.
Lieutenant Wilson is in the room.
Okay, perfect. He is?
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you. So these next 4 slides, I'll defer to the lieutenant so he can walk through response times, call for service, and some of the crime activity that he's been seeing and we've been monitoring over the last few months.
Good afternoon.
We can hear you.
You guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect, thank you. As Chris stated, take a few moments, go over this report with you. This is Q1 of 2023, something that the PSC continually gets on a monthly basis. And before getting into the metrics on this, kind of share some efficiencies with the reporting of this particular subject. This thing prior was about 24 pages on a monthly basis, was taking your BDT and your set supervisor roughly 30 to 40 hours to create just this report, which was pretty large, voluminous, and had a lot of redundancies that as we got together as a leadership team, figured out a way to combat some of that, make our staff more efficient, and get them back out there for boots on the ground. So between your CM, ACM, myself, and our teams, we kind of put this together. And it's obviously, it can change based on the needs. So we're looking at doing a year-to-year comparison as well as the last quarter to see if we have any any actual crime trends, and you guys can kind of see the ebbs and flows that we're seeing here on our end. But real quickly, we broke it down into 3 pages. Essentially has all of your information that the 24 page report had in a pretty laid out, easy to read fashion. So your top part here is your ART times, your average response times. And if you look across from Jan, February, March, those are pretty standard for your priority one through 4s. You compare that to some of the other cities, we're tracking very, very well. Going down to the bottom screen, those are your CFS or your calls for service that we're averaging each month. Again, broken down by priorities, you can kind of see, you know, or priority 1s are where they should be, very, very minimal. Those are typically your code 3 response, lights and sirens. 2 3s are some things that we need to give some love to, just not as an immediate fashion. Your priority 4s or your low levels, no suspect information, nothing in progress, things like that. And then all those are based on your part 1, 2s through your FBI UCR data. We can go to the next slide. So for page 2 of 3, we have our part 1 and part 2 crime data. So your part 1 crimes, I'll take you up top here. This is pushed out again last quarter through March, the end of March here. And as you can see, I'll take your attention to the far right, as we all know, here in the Coachella Valley, it's not specific to just our city alone, but the larceny thefts are going to be our primary target, which you look at it, depending on which way you look at it, it's a blessing and a curse, right? Obviously, we'd like 0 crime within our city limits, but if we ever had to, we don't want this pendulum swung and having our central or criminal homicides, the forcible sexual assaults, robberies, things like that. Though we want those pushed down as low as we can. So the larceny thefts are something that we implement using, you know, bait bike programs. We'll throw a purse in one of our UC cars, set up teams with comms, have takeaway cars and start mashing. But as you guys know, you know, that's been a plague in the state of California, not just a Palm Desert or Coachella Valley issue. That's something that's going to take state legislator. You guys have heard the DA, the sheriffs speak for years about this topic of, you know, they've decriminalized a lot of things, and unfortunately the criminals have caught on to this, and so they know the threshold is under 950. They're out with a citation, or they're in and out with fingerprints, a photo, and out the door. It's a whole nother conversation for another time frame, but that leads to why we're seeing this data that we are with part 1 crime reporting on the far right. Going down to the second part of this page, we thought it was relevant to share the part 2 crime with all of our constituents. So for our data for January, February, March, again, you're seeing a little pop in narcotics. Obviously, you guys have kept your CVNTF officer, which is just doing amazing work. Your simple assaults are right where they should be. The fraud calls, you know, it's that paper terrorism, everything else is very difficult to combat, especially if you start bouncing off IP addresses or using fake money checks, things like that. You're running around and needing a lot of search warrants to accommodate that. And usually, as we talked about a couple of months ago with the LPR system, a lot of that leads to fictitious and fraudulent information being utilized in the first place. Your warrants or cases that are submitted, and for whatever reason, the courts and the justice system, those people are back on our streets, and so there's a warrant in the system for them. That's what you represent in the middle there. Your DUI is always a huge topic, especially with our valley and the population that we have. The excessive speed is obviously a driving force here, specifically correlated to our DUIs. You're seeing a lot of cannabis related stuff now that's popped with the legalization over the years. Public intoxication, again, you know, we try and do everything we can on a unified front to get them family, friends to support that if we can, and if not, we'll take the ride. And then obviously, as touched upon in PSC yesterday, and a huge part to all of our business owners and residents in the city is your trespass violations out there on the far right. You have your citywide trespass program, which I want to compliment the city leadership, all of your department heads, and your code enforcement department. They've been working seamlessly with us, making that program stronger and stronger every year, getting buy-in from our business owners, property managers, things like that. And we're well over 100 businesses and growing. And there's buy-in on it. That letter is good for 365 days, no questions asked. They know that if they have a trespasser on premises that's been worn there gives us the teeth and leverage. If it's 2 a.m. on a Sunday, it doesn't matter. We now have to don't have to go wake them up, get them out there on scene, and sign the private person's arrest form. It's already done. We know that is on file and something that we take very seriously. Your BDT does a fantastic job at spearheading that. We push that out to all of our patrol teams, all of your specialty teams, and that's something that your other contractual cities out of the station are also jumping on board with and following the lead. We can run to the next one. So for our last slide here, huge hot topic here, especially with 7 fatalities here in the last 110, 120 days within the city. And something that our city leadership and council have had numerous conversations in, and then with our team, how to drive these numbers down, right? You're seeing just a lot of reckless behavior that comes in us all the time. I mean, I reside there in a mid-county, and I've got people flying by me like I'm standing still all day long. So something that we've seen a need in, and for those reasons, here's how we broke this down into a very simplistic form to kind of show people where we're tracking in our city. So your collisions by type here, you're obviously on your top there's going to be your dark green. That's going to be your injury and fatal collisions. Obviously, we want those driven down as low as we can. Your non-injury collisions are going to be your 1182s, your 1181s if it's just a minor complaint of pain, something or exchange of information, things for insurance purposes needs. So those are always good to keep a track on that. As you can see, those took a little bit of a dip in February, and we've seen a little rise in March, to be expected with the influx of the population that we're seeing down here at the polo fields right now, and we're getting ready to rock with another 100,000 people coming in here into this confined area. So with that and with the traffic stipulations, you got some drivers that don't want to take the extra 10, 20 minutes to do the right thing, and so we try as hard as we can to get them on our radar and get that prevention effort going. In the middle here is another important piece to traffic enforcement with your citation data. Looking at January, February, March. So your green again is going to be your non-hazardous. Easiest way to break that down for us is your correctable citations, tent on your windshield, broken tail light that's easily correctable, things like that. It's going to be considered a non-hazardous. As you can see, those are typically handled in just a warning fashion. This is what we saw in your vehicle. Please bring it up to code. And usually out, those are the actual citations that have been written through the first quarter. And then your citations for your hazardous, this is kind of what we're talking about that correlates to your TCs up top, right? Your hazardous citations are going to be your excessive speed, the illegal turns, the running the red lights, the things that keep plaguing all of us and that we just don't want to see. And again, you're seeing that trend, right? As we spoke to, talking to your traffic supervisor and all of your motors and your CSOs assigned to traffic, you're seeing that number increase for a couple of reasons. One, again, you have a lot more population that's coming out here and that we're seeing, and two, that staff's directly assigned to these tasks with enforcing traffic or getting out behind their desks with those serious fatal and very serious collisions that we experienced in the first part of the year. So looking to continue that line in upward mobility and keep those down. Or keep the citations rising, which in turn should be keeping those collisions at bay there up top. And the last piece of information, depending on which book that you buy into with your TEI index or your TCI with your traffic collision index, essentially the higher the number of your traffic enforcement index with your dark brown here at the bottom third graph, essentially the safer your city. So that's it in theory. As you can see, we're the January was down. Obviously, that was a month that plagued us. We're all familiar with it. We increased that in February and in March. As you can see there with the data, with your traffic enforcement index, it essentially how we calculate those figures are. You go in there and take your accidents between the hazardous citations and your DUI or your deuce arrests, and you divide that by your fatal and injury collisions, and you get that information. So in a nutshell, we want the higher number lower number on the bottom, which we're seeing the higher number on top. And again, in theory, the thought behind that process for your traffic enforcement index is the more traffic citations that you go out and write, in theory, your vehicle collisions should reduce. Again, not always a perfect science, but that's it in a nutshell. And that's kind of the monthly. We broke this into a quarterly, and I actually got with the traffic team, followed up with the PSCs, looking at some yearly stats, and we're in the process of adjusting that as well to get some year-to-year comparisons for council and everyone involved, looking to see, kind of what method. But again, we took this down. The whole point behind it, this report that your ACM and your CM have given me the latitude to go ahead and adjust. We took 30, 40 hours of your sworn sergeant's time and broke that down to about an hour. And now this gives us a plug and play method of being able to break it down. So many fronts that we see this advantageous. And again, we're able to tweak it as necessary. So if there's something that, something else, somebody else would like to see, or a different method, this gives us the latitude. We've got a couple other contract cities outside of our station that are utilizing this very, very similar format. And we found it successful. It seems like PSC is fairly happy with that reporting method. And again, we're happy to share any info that comes up along the way. And that kind of concludes the monthly or quarterly report that is incorporated here for Q1 of 2023. Be more than happy to answer any questions or anything that anyone has.
Is that the full presentation?
We have just one more slide, Mayor,
Okay.
in summation. So essentially, given the importance of public safety as well as being mindful of the cost, this package here provides a service enhancement at minimal cost. We know that we're returning to calls for service to levels before the pandemic. So there's a greater need and emphasis, especially with ALPR, for us to focus on metrics and new reporting methods. And so our commitment is to come back to you on a quarterly basis to show the measurable outcomes of service changes and needs. And then at the same time, the contract with the Sheriff's Department expires next fiscal year. And so our whole effort here is to prepare us for that upcoming contract renewal discussion.
Great. Let me see first if colleagues have questions, and I'll start at this end with Councilmember Truby.
No questions. I was actually fortunate enough to see this presentation yesterday with public safety, so thank you.
Sure. Mayor Pro Tem Quintanilla.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As usual, I have quite a few questions. So if we are looking at the calls for service, where we look at average response times and number of service calls, under priority 4, it says cold calls. Is that an average of looking back at previous reports? Is that warrants, or what is covered under cold calls?
You guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, so priority 4 is going to be cold calls, right? That's something where when a call comes into our dispatch center, a past fraud where there's no suspect information, a person that calls in to report, their credit card was used a month ago at an unknown location, things like that, or they come back. They discover that part of their lawn furniture had been removed. We have nothing to go on right at that time. That would sit in the queue as a priority 4. So essentially the 4 is the lowest priority, to where, yes, we're going to get someone there, but it frees up our sworn staff for, the armed robberies, the sexual assaults in progress, the burgs in progress, major injury collisions, things like that, where we would need a response immediately. So the priority 4 are the calls where there is no suspect information. The reporting party who's calling it in may not be available at their house or via telephone at that time, and just wants a call back to report it into.
Thank you. And are those typically handled, or how much of that is handled by our CSO versus your sworn officers?
So excellent question. Typically the priority 4 is going to be handled by your non-sworn staff or your CSO. So One thing not contained in this report that your city leadership and our team has gotten together on is, and things that we can definitely share here in the future, is getting right. The whole point when I came on after these changes were already done, and boosting the 3 CSOs into the contract is. There's very, very, very good things I can use with CSOs as we're finding out. Obviously, we're not going to throw them into our hot priority calls that are coming out. However, on the back end, those staff in a non-sworn status are, well versed in taking on injury traffic collisions, frauds, things of that nature, past burglaries, telephone reports, anything like that. So a lot of those priority 4s are going to be handled, which is the system is designed for that. So in the last year to 18 months, your call volume with the CSOs, identifying a need for them to handle, and with appropriate training, of course, to get them into that role and handling those fraudulent investigations where they may not have that background. We've educated them, we've given the proper training and resources to be successful for it. There are specialty teams, our investigations bureau, things like that can follow it up. Granted, there is no current suspect on premises or during that call that they can handle. So it essentially is freeing up a lot more time for your sworn staff to be doing exactly what you would expect them to be doing, exactly what I would expect them to be doing, and being able to kind of bifurcate those things and reallocate resources as necessary.
That is excellent information, and that correlates to my second question. On the following slide where you discuss the select part 2 crime data, there's a substantial increase in warrants. Is that partly because you have more time as CSOs have freed up things and there's an easier opportunity to go for those? Is that mostly like priority 4, or how does that fall in, since that's the 3rd highest rate of service?
Yeah, so your warrants are something, and that's excellent question. Again, your AWS or your automated warrant services is something to where a deputy walks a case in to the district attorney's office, gets a warrant in the system, or they file out of custody on a suspect. After numerous attempts, they're unable to locate that person responsible for that crime. They send it off to the district attorney's office, and then a bench warrant gets issued based on that. Or another method is, the deputy officer goes, generates the report, puts the person in custody. They get OR'd or fed kicked or released from jail, right?
Perfect. And my other.
And then on their court, and the judge issues I'm sorry.
No, go on ahead. I thought that you had concluded. Please continue.
Oh, I'm sorry. So numerous methods for a warrant to be in the system on a person. We did a couple of weeks ago. We had speaking of our traffic enforcement, our traffic team got together, paired up with all the special enforcement teams and all our regional teams, and we did a DUI sweep throughout the city limits. I got numerous offenders that had the outstanding warrants, even though it's a quote unquote a low level DUI misdemeanor warrant. We take it very seriously. I know that everyone on in this meeting takes this very seriously, and something to where you offend in our city, we're going to send a message that is not going to be tolerated, and we're going to come find you one way or another. So the warrants are something that are already in the system. It gives us leverage to go out there, put them back into the system, and it's I hate to say it, but it's kind of a rinse and repeat, right? We can go and we'll play the same circle again. If they didn't go to court once, we probably know they're not going to go twice until finally they get the right magistrate that's, put some teeth into the system and says, hey, we're done playing this game. We're just going to remand you into custody until this case gets cleared up one way or another.
Thank you. And my final question, and thank you for being so thorough and allowing me to throw all of these at you. In looking at the information for trespass violations, I'm grateful that we have the support of your officers when we have support for unsheltered individuals. Is that the majority of them? And beyond that, what are the other frequent types of calls that you see for trespassing?
Sure. So that, yes. Another great question that I could keep us here all night with, but I won't. The trespass violations, you're seeing a huge spike in that. So when you see the data here for trespass violations, we have many, as we know, with our homeless task force, bringing on Jason onto the team recently. We're working with our homeless outreach team, with the county and your business district team. Our main goal with the unhoused is obviously to put them back into society in a professional manner, to where, give them some trade skills and get them back reintegrated in the community. Right, and that's my goal. That's our stance, and that's the approach we take until we get to a point with some of these individuals who either have violent tendencies or addiction issues, to where unfortunately we've come to a stalemate, to where so many of our stakeholders in the city, whether it be the business owners or complaints coming into city council or city leadership, come that a lot of these violators are your frequent flyers that unfortunately a resource resilient program unfortunately just is not going to be effective for them. So in those cases, then we take the enforcement action, and obviously we know that's not a perfect system, as everybody knows, but that's the only method that, one, get them clean from whatever addiction, or at least get them detoxed for the current time being, and then keep working, trying to locate family, trying to outreach with resources to get them on board. And as we all know, and talking with our Stephen Nelson, who's now on our patrol bureau as a corporal, and during his 4.5 years on that team, 99 contacts with that same individual, the answer is no. And on the 100th time, he's like, you know what? I'm sick of you guys. I'm sick of you guys messing with me. I'm sick of going to jail. I'm sick of getting these bench warrants. But you know what? Let's give it a shot. And there are a lot of resources, as we all know, and ultimately that is our goal. But it's a game where it's a multi-pronged approach. But yes, the trespass violations, those are that you're seeing on these figures, are business owners that we work together with us, code enforcement, the homeless outreach team, our hot team, taking it from many fronts, evaluated these individuals and identified them as people that unfortunately aren't willing to accept the resources at that time, and it violated laws or city ordinances, to which we do take enforceable action on.
And the second part of that question was beyond the unsheltered. Are the rest of them related to, for example, the larceny and theft, or what is the second highest reason that we have trespassing?
Yeah, of course. Your unhoused typically are going to be a majority of your people with the trespasses, as with your larceny thefts, right? You're seeing that. You're seeing that a lot. The people that aren't out there, working and find it easy to go out and victimize others. That's very easy, right? And again, we're talking about a much larger piece of that pie with legislators and things, to where that's where we are now. So once they understand that game, and I believe that the district attorney just said this in one of his recent briefings, a 3-year, 8-month offender that was fed kicked within 72 hours in custody. It's not an uncommon occurrence that we're seeing. So we have that mechanism to get them off the street. Unfortunately, the flip side to that, and it's not popular, is that they're right back on the street, typically before the officer or deputy has completed their report. And that's a much larger problem. But we are going to come to work, do our jobs, do it thoroughly, do it accurately, and address your guys' needs and the stakeholders' needs in the city every single day. So you're going to see that trespass violation continue to be up there. The larceny thefts, like I said, I filtered through the press release within the last couple of days on your Desert X, right? I had Jen, your executive director, hit me up, and the chief for DHSPD and Cabazon, because you have 3 locations. It's like, Chris, I need help. We're getting, people are coming in, breaking windows to cars, stealing valuables, and they're gone. And within 48 hours, you got over $70,000 in recovered merchandise. The flip side to that is, it's a property crime. We don't have a crime against a person. I know it's unpopular to say it, but that's where we are, right? There is no real teeth in that system. Yes, we have numerous victims identified. We're going to package that up, get with the district attorney, put all of those victims together and bundle it up, and let the system do what it's going to do. So those are more crimes of opportunities where When you're looking at the larceny thefts, you're seeing some things where we're going on an educational aspect and trying to push out press releases, trying to get out there in these community meetings, your HOAs, your neighborhood watch, and say, hey guys, we know it's, we're trying to build this safe, crime-free community. However, you leave a purse on the front seat if it's not our bait car, right? We don't want it being stolen. So
Let's get the next question.
Okay.
And I have to needle you just a little bit, Lieutenant Wilson. All of our questions are excellent. So let's see if Councilmember Nastante has any excellent questions.
I was just going to overall, and I apologize for being a few minutes late if you address this, the license plate reader program that the city approved, I would assume it's been highly successful. Did you want to add anything to it? Hopefully it's making your job easier to catch criminals.
yeah, again, excellent question. Yes. And I apologize. I know I can get very, very long-winded, and so you'll have to, put that red stop sign on me, say your time's up. In a nutshell, yes, highly successful. I think Councilman Truby last time asked, and in a very short manner, I said yes. By that I mean with this session, I'll take a deeper dive in. Part of our job in speaking to the people that violate law is to also get information and get, as much as they play the game with us, we do the same and get intel to try and stop the reoffending. And with these LPRs, essentially any crime committed with a vehicle associated with it gives us an investigative lead. We have been absolutely lights out with this program. The cases that we've spoken about, we're going to keep feeding those success stories. The recovery rate now, I think we were at over $700,000 when I presented it last month. You're well on your way to 7 figures at this point, with the average of about 16 grand a car. But yes, very successful. And the note I want to hit is that message is getting out there on the CBNTF and the gang task force and our patrol investigations. When I go around and have thorough debriefs on some of these major incidents, one thing that we are hearing, a common theme, is we are not going to mess around in Palm Desert because we're getting apprehended. So that is worth its weight to us, at least in our shop, is gold. These are coming from offenders that, even though they know they can see the technology, right? It's there. They're stopping that and going and doing their dirt in other areas. So that's got an impact. It's for them to tell us that, knowing that that's, whether it's under Miranda or just talking with a deputy or an investigator, for us is absolutely huge. We did not used to get that kind of information.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Harnick.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Lieutenant Willison. I have a really average question. You talked about the DUIs and then you mentioned cannabis. And I just want to know, are we making progress with being able to identify those who are DUI candidates using cannabis? Any kind of testing?
So, yes, progress. Yes, obviously, as you and I, as everyone in here knows, the alcohol is very, it's very easy to spot, right? We've all been in our ventures in our lives and they're like, oh, they're probably UTI to some degree, right? And then we have the e-pass, the pass that gives us an immediate printout on, hey, here's where they are, right? We have the threshold of 0.08, which used to be 0.1 in California. Very easy. Is when you start mixing the pills and seeing some of the other drugs and or intoxicants mixed into that. Typically, it's not just a one and done, right? A lot of these people, we're starting to see a lot of things, different things on board. But specific to cannabis, there's a huge educational aspect in it because the laws are always changing with cannabis related, and it is legal. To some degrees, and there's state law that that contradicted the federal law, and so you get those blurred lines. But to answer your question, yes, we are making an impact. We are seeing an uptick in cannabis related incidents, and we are, our DREs, our drug recognition experts, the people that we're sending to our drug abuse recognition class, which is 2-3 days. We are getting a lot more of our newer staff trained up to identify these things. So if they see someone that's potentially UTI, they have more leverage, more tools in their tool bag to be able to balance out, evaluate, and then ultimately, if need be, get them off the road in a safe manner.
Hey, thank you very much.
And I just have one question. I noticed burglaries increased from 23 to 41 between February and March. A home invasion is a very, very disconcerting crime to residents. Do we know or have a theory as to the cause for that increase?
Sure. So your burglary is 459 PC of the Penal Code. So a burglary is going into a residence or an inhabited dwelling with the intent to commit a theft or a crime. So two differences between your residential commercial burglary and your home invasion, right? Versus your cat burglary. Your cat burglary, give you a quick crash course, is where the resident is home at the time of that commission of the crime. Your home invasion is where, they go in and actually, make contact with your homeowner and, still proceed with your burglary on top of your home invasion. And then your residential burglary is where, you go on vacation for a week, you come back and you see that someone has made entry and taken items, valuables from your home. So a lot of time with your residential burglaries, even your commercial burglaries, it is, you're not seeing the numbers that you are in your larceny theft, but yeah, you have professional burglary crews that go around and victimize. And it's why you guys have supported a burglary suppression unit, which we have another contract city on as well, that their sole purpose and sole job is to follow up on these residential burglaries, go canvass neighborhoods, look at video surveillance, get ring photos, ring video, etc., and start working with all of our agencies, because our burglars are the other city's burglars are the other, and we're seeing an uptick where, like on the our recent last couple of series on El Paseo, these people are not Palm Desert residents, they're not Coachella Valley residents. I think the last two crews that hit us, and then the Cal DOJ did a press release on 8 of these guys, they're hitting countrywide. So again, when you bring massive amounts of people into our valley, like we have been with the the date festivals, the tennis tournaments, the fashion week, the food and wine, sparking into these concerts, unfortunately, you're going to bring a very small population, which are just out to go and know that people are having a good time, bringing a lot of things with them, and victimizing our communities. So obviously, with those things, we put our tools and resources into play. We try and anticipate the crime trends, days, times of the week when these things are occurring, and combat that at every level. Kind of like with our Desert X, we put all hands on board with that. Ended up writing a search warrant out of a partner city, and then that investigation spearheaded into numerous other victims and a lot of other follow-up search warrants, things like that. So
all right, I would appreciate it if you could report to us through the city manager whether that kind of March uptick in burglaries happens annually concurrent with the festivals, or if this is something different that might warrant attention. So perhaps we can have some follow-up. Thank you both very, very much. We can't build a happy life without starting with a safe foundation. So this issue is of paramount interest to our residents, and we appreciate all the information. So thank you. Are we ready for topic 2?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
All right, I want to say just a couple of introductory words about our process before I turn this topic over to our city clerk. In Palm Desert, just about every issue of significance goes through a city council subcommittee, an appointed subcommittee of 2 council members. The purpose of that system is to give the subcommittee a chance to present questions to staff that will help them research a topic as thoroughly as possible before it comes to the full city council for a decision. In my experience, this system is a big reason that our council meetings themselves are so efficient. The subcommittee has anticipated colleagues' questions and staff has come prepared to answer those questions. So we followed that process in regard to this topic. I've read some comments expressing concern that something secret was going on behind closed doors. I want to assure you all that's not the case. We were just following the usual subcommittee process. And frankly, I'm glad we did. Because the questions that the subcommittee asked have produced a pretty substantial staff report, highlights of which we're about to hear. So I'm thankful that the subcommittee process unearthed some additional considerations that certainly were outside my view. Because of that significant body of material, we've opted to start with this study session so that we can all hear the same presentation at the same time and have the opportunity to ask some follow-up questions. Contrary to the impression some of the media reports gave, this is not an occasion for the council to discuss or express opinions. It's an occasion for us to listen to the staff report, seek clarification, so that we'll have all the information we need to reflect before this topic comes back to us on May 25th for discussion and direction to staff. So in the interim, we are receiving and digesting all of the written public comment that's being received. If you want to make public comment in person, May 25th will be the time to do that because study sessions do not include public comment. But there will be a full opportunity for public comment on May 25th. So with that, Mr. Clerk, take it away.
Honorable Mayor and City Council, I'm Anthony Mejia, City Clerk, and joining via Zoom, we have Jim Priest with BB&K specializing in elections, and Dr. Douglas Johnson of National Demographics Corporation. Today, I'll review the results of staff's research related to districting options, and I'd like to note that staff intends to return at the May 25th council meeting for formal direction. So let's begin. On December 15th, 2022, the City Council established a subcommittee of districting consisting of Councilmember Harnick and Mayor Pro Tem Quintanilla. On February 10th, 2023, the subcommittee held its first and only meeting to provide direction to staff on options to research. The options included 3 single-member districts with 2 members elected at large, 4 single-member districts with an at-large mayor, and 5 single-member districts. In addition, staff was asked for a demographic analysis on Advisory Measure B, an analysis on ranked choice voting, and an evaluation of demographers. Before moving on, I'd like to note that the 3 districts with 2 members elected at large is not a legally viable option in California and won't be discussed further in this presentation. Also, the demographic analysis on Advisory Measure B is not yet available as the information hasn't been released by the Secretary of State. But if it is released before the May 25th meeting, we'll include that in your next presentation. To analyze ranked choice voting and for comparative purposes, I've pulled voting data from the cities of Albany, which also used ranked choice voting for its first time in November 2022, and Berkeley, which used ranked choice voting since 2010. As you can see in this chart, the city of Albany had approximately 12% of their voters skip the municipal election, and approximately 1.5% made an overvoting error in their first round. In the city of Palm Desert, we had approximately 8% of the voters skip our municipal election, and nearly 2.4% made an overvoting error in the first round. Yes. Certainly. So the most consequential error would be overvoting in the first round. So when the voter is choosing their first choice, they're supposed to select only one candidate. But in that first column, the voter may have chose 2 candidates or 3 candidates or more. And so because the registrar of voters can't ascertain what the voter's intention was in choosing their first choice, that ballot is set aside and not counted because we can't determine who that ballot belongs to.
.36% of our voters overvoted. That means 2.36% of the ballots were void.
Yes.
Okay.
Is that Albany, Oregon?
No, I'm sorry. That's Albany, California.
Okay, thank you.
I broke things up. Let's try to save our questions.
Okay, and then in the city of Berkeley, District 1, about 8% of their voters skipped the municipal election and 1% made an overvoting error. And in District 8, about 17% of the voters skipped the election and 1.1% made an overvoting error. Based on these findings, staff has identified that the city of Palm Desert should focus more attention on educating the community about marking the ballots correctly and how to avoid overvoting in future elections. When it comes to demographer options, staff identified several options, including National Demographics Corporation, Redistricting Partners, Redistricting Insights, Baird Demographics and Research, and Best and Krieger. National Demographics Corporation, or NDC, previously worked with the city in creating the existing 2-district system in 2017 and 18. They are politically neutral technicians and have never drawn maps for a political party. On the other hand, Redistricting Partners is headed by Paul Mitchell, who also serves as the Vice President of Political Data Incorporated. And these companies are largely associated with the Democratic Party and progressive candidates. Conversely, Redistricting Insights is headed by Matt Rexroad and Fabian Valdez, and this company is largely associated with the Republican Party. Baird Demographics and Research utilizes the services of David Eli of Compass Demographics, and David Eli serves as the demographer for Attorney Shankman. And finally, Best and Krieger does not have an in-house demographer, resulting in a lack of control over the map-making process. Therefore, on May 25th, staff will be recommending selecting NDC to serve as the city's demographer, should the city council choose to move forward with districting. Now let's talk districting. Should the city council decide to move forward with districting, it would be ideal to receive city council direction on the preferred number of districts by July 2023. Staff would then follow up in August with a detailed outreach plan to commence in the fall, with the intention of adopting a final map in January 2024. This would ensure potential candidates running for city council will know where they'll be running from before the formal nomination period begins in July 2024. Briefly, this slide is a reminder of the federal, state, and other traditional redistricting principles. Mainly, we want to ensure that each single member district has equal population, districts are contiguous, compact, and easily identifiable boundaries. As a reminder, staff will be presenting options related to 4 districts within at-large mayor and 5 single-member districts. Due to the Fair Maps Act, staff is prohibited from showing the draft test maps. Instead, we'll share the demographic information corresponding to those number of districts. In the demographer's preliminary best efforts, a 4-district with an at-large mayor system would result in District 1's Latino citizen voting age population, which is CVAP, dropping from 44.81% to 39.93%, while white CVAP would increase to nearly 53%. Under a 5-district system, District 1 could remain unchanged. Now we will review the legal analysis and impediments to districting prior to the 2030 census. Under the Fair Maps Act, a city may only adopt new district boundaries in between censuses if it is the first time districting, under a court order, or the city charter provides for mid-cycle redistricting. When it comes to mid-cycle redistricting, the city charter does not currently contain any provisions related to mid-cycle redistricting. If the city council were to choose this option, the city must submit a ballot measure at a future election, possibly the March 2024 presidential primary or the 2024 presidential election in November. Authorization by ordinance alone would be vulnerable to a legal challenge. When it comes to a court order, the existing settlement agreement and stipulated judgment contemplate allowing for mid-cycle redistricting to a 5 single-member district system. To this limited extent, Attorney Shankman, his clients, and the court have already agreed this form of mid-cycle redistricting is permissible. However, it would be prudent to seek an amendment to the stipulated judgment that specifically addresses this issue, which would require negotiation with Attorney Shankman and his clients. If agreed upon and an amended stipulated judgment is ordered, this process would eliminate one significant avenue of a legal challenge. A 4-district plus an at-large mayor option is allowed under the government code when the change is in furtherance of the California Voting Rights Act. The demographer's preliminary best efforts could not identify a 4+1 configuration that does not result in diluting Latino citizen voting age population in District 1. Therefore, this option does not appear to be in furtherance of the California Voting Rights Act. If the city council were to choose this option, the city would need to negotiate with Attorney Shankman and his clients, and the court would need to approve the amended judgment. A 5-district option appears to be consistent with the stipulated judgment, advisory measure B, and applicable law. However, absent a court order, there is a risk for a third-party legal challenge. Therefore, staff believes it would be prudent to negotiate with Shankman and his clients to specifically address this issue and amend the stipulated judgment. In summary, absent a court order or charter amendment, it does not appear that the city may mid-cycle redistrict under the Fair Maps Act without risk of a legal challenge. However, if Attorney Shankman and his clients are agreeable to a change, the risk of a legal challenge is reduced. And while federal and state law does not require the use of ranked choice voting, if the city council were to desire to eliminate its use, we would need to renegotiate this issue with Shankman and his clients. For consideration at the May 25th meeting, staff will seek direction on whether Palm Desert should divide into smaller districts or maintain the existing 2-district system. If the city council chooses to move forward with districting, we will seek direction on whether we should rely on the existing stipulated judgment as a court order, seek an amendment to the stipulated judgment to specifically address mid-cycle redistricting, or seek a charter amendment. We will also ask whether there is a desire to continue with the use of ranked choice voting, or if we should attempt to negotiate elimination of its use. And lastly, staff will present a recommendation for NDC to serve as the city's demographer if needed. Jim, Doug, and I are available for any questions.
Thank you. I'll start on the other side this time with our excellent questions. Councilmember Harnick.
Since I have no excellent question, I'll pass.
Councilmember Nestante.
The results of the last election on this measure, do we have a breakout of how many people that lived in District 1 versus District 2? Did I miss that?
That was included in the staff report, but
I don't have it in front of me.
certainly, citywide, the advisory measure B did pass by 53.24%. If we separate it out by district, in District 1, it passed by 57.79%, and in District 2 by 52.7%.
Okay, and thank you. And then my question of the 2.36 overvote, did that affect the outcome of the election?
Anytime a vote's not counted, it could always impact the outcome of the election. But it's impossible to know what the outcome of that would have been because we couldn't ascertain what their intention was because of the overvote.
Okay, and then one last question. Would it be fair to say that during the last election, it was very hard to determine how the percentages of votes were getting distributed after round one? Do you have any comment or clarification? It
Certainly.
seemed very difficult to follow, and I know a lot of the residents found
Certainly.
it difficult.
So the city adopted two versions of ranked choice voting. For District 1, we have single winner ranked choice voting, which is much simpler because whole votes are transferred when a candidate is eliminated. So if the lowest vote receiving candidate is eliminated, all of their votes are transferred to the voter's next favorite candidate. In multi-winner ranked choice voting, it's much more complicated because you have both the process in which the lowest receiving candidates' votes are redistributed, but you also have the situation where if a candidate wins outright, as Councilmember Harnick did, and has surplus votes, meaning that person has reached the minimum threshold to win, and now they have votes that they don't necessarily need. So those excess votes are then transferred to the voter's next favorite choice. But that is fractional votes because, of course, the council member still needs to retain the threshold. So in this last election, in the case of Councilmember Harnick, everybody who voted for Councilmember Harnick, there was an excess of 1,300 plus votes. Of the 6,700 people that voted for her, they all received a fraction of their vote back. In this case, it was approximately 20% of their vote. That vote is then redistributed to their next favorite candidate. That process, as we go through round by round, plus as more ballots are being counted, because you have vote by mail ballots, you have ballots that are provisional because they may have registered on that same day, the results change hour by hour. And because of the way the state has set up ballot tabulations, it can take up to 3 or 4 weeks before all of the ballots are counted. So every day the results are changing. And of course, the fractional votes make it much more complicated.
Indeed, that's an understatement.
Could I jump in here to ask some follow-up questions to try to make sure as many of us as possible grasp what you just said? Because it went by very quickly. In the most recent election, voters understood they were voting to fill 2 council vacancies, correct?
Yes.
And under ranked choice voting, if a candidate received X percent, they were elected without further application of ranked choice voting rule. So what was that X percent?
So in this election, the threshold in round 1 was 5,393 votes.
And that's what percent?
That should be approximately 33.3% plus 1.
Okay. So do I understand correctly that what happened was because Councilmember Harnick received more than that minimal threshold, the system did give some value to the second place votes of those who had voted for her first.
Correct.
And that value was determined by creating a fraction in which the numerator was the amount by which she exceeded the threshold,
Correct.
and the denominator was the threshold,
Correct.
which turned out to be roughly 20%.
In this case.
So if you made Councilmember Harnick your first choice, your second choice vote went into the tabulation at 20%.
Correct.
And if Councilmember Harnick had just beat the threshold by one vote, her supporters' second place votes effectively would go nowhere.
Correct.
I think that would surprise most voters, which, since we're all on it, I'll just ask this follow-up question. Do we, because the settlement agreement simply referred to ranked choice voting without defining how that system works, or without referencing another jurisdiction's pattern, do we know whether there's any jurisdiction, any place using ranked choice voting to fill multiple vacancies at the same time, which is using it differently than you and I just described?
We don't know, but we can certainly research that and provide you with an update at the May 25th meeting.
Okay. And Mayor Pro Tem Quintanilla, I don't expect you to speak to this now, but I would invite you between now and the 25th to just think about whether you and your fellow plaintiff are open to any changes in how ranked choice voting operates. I hadn't really meant to do all of that just then, but you teed it up.
And I am finished. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Quintanilla. Questions?
Thank you. I didn't have questions before, but in reviewing and going over this morning, given the potential for litigation as we're looking at the different options and the cost for the original settlement to where we are in having two districts, the cost was approximately $555,000 to the city. What is the cost per hour that we are billed by Best and Krieger? And essentially, what was the cost per week to Mr. Shankman?
Cost per week?
Yes, roughly. I mean, I don't know how many hours, the billable hours, if you have that, or just in consideration of how long this could potentially continue in at the court until we look at potential stipulations or external lawsuits.
So we could do the research, but just so I'm clear, you're wanting to know what the hourly rate was at the time of the first settlement agreement?
Yes, overall, just for contrast, I mean, as we're looking at how we got here, where we can go, and what the potential cost would be under the various options. I think that it's important to see not only the data information for voters, but also the financial impact of that as well.
We can attempt to do that. I will just say that it's going to be difficult to ascertain how many billable hours Shankman's it's going to apply towards even talking to him briefly.
And that's why I was thinking roughly an hour. If we can take an estimate of saying that amount had this many weeks so that if we can anticipate fluctuation, it would give us a rough guess. I mean, again, I don't expect a perfect answer, but a rough idea. And my following question is where you mentioned in Berkeley's District 1 and 8, are those the high and the low? Or were those selected at random? Or if possible, looking at it in the middle?
When you say high or low, I'm not sure.
When you're in the report, I'm looking at what page that was. When you show Albany versus Palm Desert, Berkeley District 1 and Berkeley District 8, were 1 and 8 selected as the first threshold or second, or just in going 1 through 8?
I selected 1 and 8 because they had elections which used ranked choice voting. So those other districts either only had 2 candidates, so ranked choice voting didn't play into the determination. So because of Berkeley using it for 12 years at that point, I wanted to give a comparison of another city that's using it for their first time in comparison to a city and voters that have gotten used to it over the course of 5 or 6 elections.
So that's the same in District 8. There was ranked choice that was applied because of multiple candidates.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Councilmember Truby.
Yeah, great report. Thanks for doing all the legwork to the subcommittee and the staff. Appreciate that. Question is, there's a prohibition against mid-cycle, meaning between censuses, districting again. If we want to, it would require a change to the city charter. Is that correct?
3 options are, or really 2 options: court order, charter amendment.
And could you just walk us through what a charter amendment would entail? This would be my first time through it, or maybe the public would like to know.
Certainly. So we would need to draft the ballot question, in which would be, in summary, along the lines of adding a new charter provision that would allow the city to redistrict, really, whether we want to say at any time or a one-time only situation. But ultimately, we would have to craft a question in which voters would decide, yes, you may mid-cycle redistrict. And then that ballot question would get submitted and the voters would need to approve it by a 50% plus 1 margin.
So the only option is to go out again to a plebiscite or to the voters. It has to be a ballot measure, not something the council can decide.
Correct. So an ordinance would certainly be vulnerable to a legal challenge.
Perfect. Thank you.
And let me just follow up on that question again to make sure we all understand this Fair Maps Act question. Clearly, cities do redistrict in response to census data. So is the hitch here that we did readjust the boundaries of our existing 2 districts in response to the most recent census?
That's correct. After the census data was released in 21, the city did undergo the redistricting process and adopted a slightly revised map. And so that avenue of redistricting has been exhausted.
And unless there is something I'm unaware of, my impression is that when we did that, we did not have the Fair Maps Act and its implications on the radar. Is that true as best you understand?
When we submitted Advisory Measure B? Is that the question?
No, when we refined the current lines for District 1.
My understanding is when the city redefined District 1 and back in 2022 early, it was before the council even began discussions on whether to submit a advisory ballot measure regarding districting.
Okay. And then just a couple of additional questions. I'm not sure if Mr. Johnson or Mr. Priest know the answer to this based on your experience. But the back and forth discussion that we had about how ranked choice voting influenced the votes of folks whose first choice met the threshold. Do either of you know from the literature what the rationale is for reducing the impact of the second place vote for those folks in an election which is filling 2 vacancies? If you don't, that's okay. You don't have to make it up.
I would be making it up, Madam Mayor, if I were to
Okay.
answer. So I'm not aware of any such information. I'll defer to Mr. Johnson if he has any information. Thank you.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. The one thing is it does factor into as the city clerk mentioned, the 33 1/3 plus 1 vote limit comes from that fact that there are 2 seats or 3 seats up in a given year is how that's calculated. Some respect it is factored in via that formula, but I think the main focus is kind of getting everyone their representative, and if you let the majority still cast 2 votes, and those 2 votes both count, well, then the traditionally underrepresented group would not be getting their votes in.
Okay. Yes, Councilmember Barnick.
I'm intrigued by the blanks. And what's interesting is Palm Desert was 8%, and then Berkeley, which has been doing this for 12 years, in one district is 8%, and the other, I think it was 17%. And Albany, I'm not sure I recall reading how long that they've been using it. But I looked at the 8%, and I said, well, this voting was a mystery to many of our voters. So that makes sense. They left it blank perhaps. But Berkeley's been doing it for a number of years. Do we have any inclination why there's such a high rate of blanks? Even the 8%, if you took the initiative to vote and then you would leave something blank, 8%, that's high when you've already got it in your hand. And then 17% is just disappointing for that one district in Berkeley. So do we have any clue why people take their ballot and then leave that blank?
It's not, well, before we get to District 8, it's not uncommon for, of course, certain races where, you're as a voter, you may be very interested in who the president or the governor or the lieutenant governor may be. But then when you get to the municipal election or the Superior Court judge, you might skip that election. So that's not uncommon. I don't know the conditions in District 8. I can certainly do some research to see if, sometimes it's the tone of the election that just turns voters off and they don't want to participate in the election. It could be the candidates themselves. I can try to do some research and certainly reach out to the city clerk of Berkeley to find out if he has any thoughts on why the drop off was so high. That amount is quite high, 17%.
Yeah, and I understand the down ballot issue, but these are generally separate ballots, right? Because it's ranked choice. It's not the down. So you have that piece of paper for your city and you just choose not to vote. I would
again need to check with Alameda County because they've been doing it for longer. And so they may have figured out a methodology to allow for one ballot. I don't know the conditions on the ground over there, but I can look into it.
Thank you.
All right. I see no further questions. I'll share with my colleagues that I am personally resolved not to speak to the press between now and May 25th because I think our discussion will be most fruitful if we show a perspective of eagerness to hear from each other before we state positions. And I will refrain from characterizing anyone else's motives. I'll let each of you speak to your own motives on the 25th. So we'll be back to this topic at that time. Yes, let's take 10 minutes before we come back to open our session.